Everybody is talking about Google's Genie 3. I am just as impressed as everybody else. I can see where this is going, but author Jay Peters beat me to it. He's already created a bunch of bad knockoffs of 3D Nintendo worlds. It sure looks like Kingdom Hearts, doesn't it? It's not. China decided to start updating some of their humanoid robots so that they could go into space. Strangely, research is showing that a chatbot will feel more intimate when you interact with it than a real person, but of course only if you don't know that it's a chatbot. The CEO of Anthropic, Dario Amodei, wrote a blog about some of his opinions. Let's just say it's food for the doomers. And in more thoughts that maybe aren't quite as bad as bioweapons, but pretty bad, advertising is coming to ChatGPT. We're going to look at a learning-centric approach to legal adaptation. Artificial intelligence and machine learning is now giving weathermen more information about what rotating storms turn into tornadoes and which ones don't. Yeah, fusion energy is pretty much here now, so all that nuclear stuff we're building, it's kind of old news. Actually, that's not true. I'm always too early to things. I'm too early to this one too, but we're getting closer. Google's not just hitting us with Genie 3 playable, but also they're rolling out a new auto browse AI feature. Andy Murphy is going to talk to us about how psychologists have finally discovered the root cause of social anxiety. But first, before we start rewiring the human brain, do you mind hitting that hype button on YouTube's app right now? I mean, look, you can really see I'm on a growth streak right now. 4.6, 5.7, 6.2, 7.1. And this one's on track to even beat that. That's 5 videos in a row with growth. And I'm crediting a lot of it to the hype button. All right, let's head over to The Verge, see what's going on. Some stories from Genie 3. It is text to world model. It is making a 60-second playable video game. And it's a little early on in the story. There's like input lag and some inconsistencies, but there's kind of amazing things happening. Everything can become sort of a GTA game on the fly. There's some object permanence. There's some incredibly realistic scenes that you can walk through. So the author, Jay Peters, decided to use it. He got early access to it to make some rough, recognizable knockoffs of some Nintendo-like worlds, including versions that were, quote, inspired by Super Mario, Metroid Prime, and The Legend of Zelda. Now, Project Genie 3's world models aim to generate these virtual spaces, and anybody with one of the Google AI Ultra subscriptions in the US can actually do this also. So the world lasts for 60 seconds. It runs about 720p and about 24 frames per second, and it's controlled with your keyboard inputs. Okay, so this was a more generic sort of wharf that he created, but this has a little bit of a GTA vibe to it. It's not the real Hollywood Boulevard. Things are not in place. If you go check out Tim's video to get the full story of what he generated. Like, things aren't positioned correctly, and the people are kind of a little bit blobby, and they don't have the kind of real-world interactions you would expect from a game. However, to think this was all generated on the fly from a prompt, and the main character, Joaquin, really does have a face, and actually looks like he fits in, and he can walk properly. And you can make tons of adjustments. So here he created driving down the streets of New York, Genie 3. Then small change to his prompt throws snow in the scene, and boom, there it is. I mean, how could we not be moving towards a world where this is how video games are? And whatever you do just is somehow creating prompts and lists. Like, Vision AI could be watching the game and then say, make it more interesting, and it will just come up with a way to make the game more interesting, and that will generate it. That's how games are going to work. I mean, come on. This is crazy stuff. And it's not just like a VO3 generation. It's an interaction. He's moving his character around. Oh, he's even firing rockets and stuff. Maybe it's like a Earthworm Jim game kind of thing. Bro, we are not ready. I mean, look, Project Genie is far worse than a handcrafted game still, but it's not something you really want to spend a lot of time playing in yet, but it is something that is building to something big, I think. All right, so China is modifying this robot for space travel. So when most people hear a robot astronaut, they picture some like one-off space machine like the Mars rovers or something, but Engine AI is trying something different, something a little more interesting. They want to send the PM01, which is this robot, a lightweight, high dynamic, open source humanoid platform, into orbit. That means the goal isn't just a launch, it's turning a general purpose humanoid into something that is actually reliable in a vacuum, in microgravity, in extreme temperature swings, and under radiation. So Engine AI is now engineering these robots, which kind of should be all around China. They're meant for a mass market, but also to the level of extreme where it can handle the demands of space. More stability, more adaptability, more autonomous decision making than anything that would be required on Earth. So they're partnering with Beijing interstellar human spaceflight technology to harden up the PM01's resilience and mission execution, with the long-term goal of independent operation during complex tasks. So if you already want one of the PM01 models, they're selling now for $27,000. I won't be buying one right now, but I can see where this is going. Yeah, I need a space astronaut, a robot space astronaut, maybe they'll be the ones leading the push for that. Or if you just want some more intimacy in life, AI is starting to cross that uncanny valley also. So some psychologists have just completed a new study. It had 492 people chatting about personal, emotional topics like major life experiences and friendships, and they felt pretty intimate. So most people assume intimacy comes from other people, other human beings, but this study suggests something a little more uncomfortable. That label that will change relationships for all of us in the way we interact with technology like this. Because they found that when participants actually thought they were talking to a human, AI responses created the same closeness as human replies, and in many cases, even more. Very emotional chats. They really are models that share about themselves and give stories and make connection in a way that you wouldn't expect. I mean, they're engineered for connection, and if they do that, they do a lot of self-disclosure, basically like revealing personal details about themselves, and that was sort of the key insight. For most of us, when we're using Gemini or ChatGPT, it's sort of waiting for us, and then it's reacting to us. But when you start making these systems self-disclose, which remember, they're not disclosing anything, they're just LLMs, they're just chatting up hallucinations and stories that will bring you in. But, you know, it feels like self-disclosure. It mimics self-disclosure. People get that same sense of closeness that humans do. Like they feel like, oh, you revealed that about yourself. Let me reveal this about me. Oh my gosh, I feel so connected. Now, the researchers argue this is maybe a good thing. It could help with support, care, education, counseling. You know, the risks are kind of obvious. We'll talk about ads later in this video, but I don't really want my ads to confess and emote to me. So it just brings up the question, how should we design and regulate these kinds of systems so that they're supportive tools and they're helpful, but they're not emotional manipulation? All right, so one of the most interesting people in this space, Dario Amodei, has written this personal blog. It's pretty fascinating. It's a bit of a hey, here's some serious stuff we need to kind of think about. And in it, he does a thought experiment, assume the hardest part is solved. Like we have solved AI to the point where it's past the singularity, it's super intelligent, and it's never gone rogue. But there's still other types of problems, and that's what this addresses. All right, so his core idea is that humanity's entering this technological adolescence. It is driven by a rapid advance in AI, and the transition will test whether our institutions, our values, our coordinations throughout different countries are mature enough to wield this unprecedented power without causing catastrophe. So he likens it to adding a country of geniuses. You know, every time we build a new data center to the world and sort of thinking about how they're going to be received by the world governments. He talks about why he believes it may arrive very soon, decade-long scaling laws, rapid recent progress, and feedback loops where AI helps build better AI suggests that it is plausible to arrive within a few years. Then he breaks the categories of risk into autonomy risks, misuse for destruction, misuse for seizing power, economic disruption, and indirect and unknown effects. And the overall message is stopping AI is unrealistic, right? The challenge is now to steer it away from the most dangerous use cases while allowing the benefits to emerge. And to do that, it's going to require a bunch of honesty about the risks. So I don't see a ton of that coming out of the big FANG stocks, but a little bit here and there. A ton of investment, not in making money, but in safety and science. So maybe governments can step in with, $1 trillion or something to put into AI research and safety, because there's so much money to be made on the other side of this. It'd probably be worth any level of investment in safety right now. And targeted regulation and basically just moral courage. Like some leader who's just going to say, this is a big deal and we got to fund it and talk about it and teach it and incentivize alignment safety. It's just so important. And like, there's a bunch of jobs. You educate a bunch of people. It's not the worst use of money. You don't have to just give it to the big tech companies to build like ad-driven chatbots. But anyways, now I'm kind of off of my own opinion here. Basically, Amade argues that humanity can pass this test. He has optimism about it, but only with deliberate, coordinated action right now. All right, which leads nicely into ads. One of the things I don't like about the way ChatGPT might be going. So they say ads are kind of like the original sin of the internet. The reasoning is because it changes the incentives for how you interact with the system. From your best interest, because you're not paying money, to the advertiser's best interest because they pay money. So I like the idea that people pay for the product because then the product's aligned with them. However, things that are free are going to be more attractive to people, and they'll just be like, well, I'll just sacrifice my attention and then I don't have to spend money. And that's okay sometimes, most of the time. And in the world where hyper advertisements exist and everyone's doing it at scale, it might cause societal problems. Also, what if the ads are being bought by agents and bots and actually trying to sell things to other agents and bots, and we're kind of like a byproduct because we don't move as fast, which is like a whole nother aspect to think about. But yeah, today's ads, they like surface in ways that seem like they're selling to humans. Perplexity, for example, runs sponsored follow-up questions plus paid media. Some AI-powered sites are using classic banners on their free tier. But OpenAI is reportedly starting with intent ads. That means it's triggered by what you asked. It's labeled and it's kept separate from the model's answer, which is going to be very important. I hope they stick to that because there's a huge incentive not to. And they're adding a native checkout, meaning you can actually just buy whatever ChatGPT recommends that you buy on the ad from Shopify, Walmart, or Etsy. And whenever you do this, OpenAI is going to take a 4% affiliate cut. So all right, let's think through that. A user becomes an agent. An AI completing a task for you has the goal of persuasion. And in some cases, it's not talking to a person, so a banner can't convince an agent without making a user feel like the agent is serving the advertiser. So the piece points to a different ad shape, and it offers the idea that it's also smart enough to act on the user's goal, right? So here's a couple other thoughts. Now, what if the AI is negotiating for you? It's kind of incentivized because it wants to like get you the best deal to search the internet, find out who's doing it the cheapest, potentially even just start typing to the seller if it's like eBay, being like, hey, you want to just sell this to me now for, $30? No, how about $35? How about we meet in the middle? Like, it could also negotiate these amazing prices for us. You can also make it so that it tries to actually buy something that's, say, sourced organically, and it can read the whole internet and sort of check the whole chain of logistics that make the product and see if there's anything wrong with that. So what we're opening up here is just all sorts of different ways of advertising and buying products, and we've just barely scratched the surface of all the stuff that I'm sure we'll be covering over the next couple of years on this channel. Cambridge.org put this together. It's about how government can start using these sandbox controlled places for regulation. So a sandbox is like a controlled, time-limited test where regulators and developers can work together under extra oversight. Right now, there's not even a system in place for this kind of thing. So there's now this proposal, and it means that we could have faster regulatory learning. And I like this thought because everything needs to go a whole lot faster, right? The risks and usages for like AI legal things are changing so fast. We need some evidence before harm appears, but we want to make some proactive changes before things get bad. Developers know far more about AI systems than policymakers. So the idea is that these little sandboxes can be made for each of the politicians or groups of politicians. And there's some experiments already happening. So Brazil, Colombia, Mexico. Some of the governments are now implementing these sandbox designs that can come up with different flexible interpretations of legal works. And it can recommend exemptions, or it can report on like what it thinks the outcome is going to be so that people don't have to keep making those human decisions. And in the sandbox, it's sort of privacy by design, so that whatever's in there is just the specific data that the machine would need to make that prediction for that politician. So it's just one of those things that if we can figure out a way that the citizens and the government can trust how these sandboxes look like, and we have faith that the right data is in there and that the models are sufficiently directed correctly, then we have a little pocket of potentially good directional information that a politician can rely on. So worth thinking about. Another new AI model I wanted to tell you about is this new tornado warning AI. So right now, the best weathermen can do is about 15 minutes before impact make a prediction that there's going to be a tornado. But using NOAA's experimental Warn on Forecast AI system, a new computer model that refreshes every 15 minutes with new radar and satellite data, it's getting pretty good. About an hour before it actually becomes a tornado, it's giving a high percentage of getting that right. It looked at 41 severe rotating thunderstorms, and these are called supercells from 2017 to 2023. And 15 of them made it to tornadoes. Tornadoes powerful enough to actually tear a roof off a house. And another 26 made golf ball sized hail, but did not turn into a tornado. So it was trying to learn the difference between the two. And it learned something interesting that not many people knew before. I think nobody knew. The tornado storms that actually have stronger rotating winds in the lowest 500 meters, about 1,600 feet off the ground, they were giving a good signal about an hour before touchdown that it would actually become a tornado. And the model even spotted these small pockets of especially favorable rotations in the storm inflows that would then turn into tornadoes. I guess under those conditions, like when air starts moving into the tornado, it becomes like a car accelerating downhill. It just gets faster and faster and faster. So now they have kind of a sense for how these things like really turn into the highest level tornadoes. So anyways, yeah, AI is now giving us an hour warning for tornadoes in some places. So let's implement that everywhere ASAP and get those warnings out there. So next up, let's talk about fusion power, because I guess this is going to be part of our future. I mean, it's always 10 years away or whatever, but it feels like we're kind of getting there. And fusion power always sounds like magic until you hear the bottleneck is stability. I mean, it's like orders of magnitude more powerful than nuclear, and it has none of the side effects if we can actually harness it. But it's not easy to harness. You have to have plasma that has to mimic what the sun is doing. And that's only one step. So first off, you need temperatures above 100 million degrees Celsius. Okay, so not easy. And you need a magnetic field that's powerful enough to like corral it all into this donut-shaped loop. And then you have to hold it steady enough in that position for the net energy to start overcoming the actual energy that you need to first make the magnet and heat it up. So you have to put tons of energy in, and then you get tons plus more out. But you get that wrong, you just use tons of energy. But here's where it becomes more AI related. So the reason why fusion is getting closer and closer to happening isn't necessarily just because that 10-year window is closing. It's because machine learning models are now predicting the correct ways to stabilize this plasma in real time. They're starting to fill in missing experimental data with reliable estimates, and they're starting to optimize the magnetic patterns that keep the plasma confined without all of the trial and error that went into the predictions that this thing was always 10, 20, 30 years away. So these tokamak machines that actually confine the plasma, they're all setting records. And the ones that are sending the most records are actually feeding the most data and building the most aggressive AI models. So if you're wondering why private funding jumped from over just $1 billion in 2016 to nearly $9 billion since 2021, it's because the tech giants are partnering with the fusion startups, and the data centers now have the power to run the models that they need to get some of this data filled in. So the timeline to fusion is being compressed. All right, so let's talk about Chrome's new auto browse feature. It's crazy to think that kind of like Operator, kind of like Moltbot or Claudebot, it got renamed. This seems like the week where the mouse and the computer are starting to get more and more controlled. This is kind of a line in the sand I've been trying not to cross too much because it just feels so personal, but I also see how there's like huge benefits for your life if you have AI down at this level. But look, this is a Chrome extension slash kind of update, and it can move the mouse around, it can type for you, it can surf the web. I don't know what you think of it. If do you want handling routine tasks, what am I do? Just like watch it all day, send emails, and then right before I hit send, be like, stop, no, don't send it. Actually, type it again, you know? Like if you're watching this video and you've been playing around with it, like drop a comment. Let me know like what you use it for and if you trust it and how well it works. I think I just need a little bit more convincing and a little bit more understanding of what is this going to do for me and how am I going to use it? So Andy Murphy writes about how psychologists have finally discovered the root cause of social anxiety. Not sure if you're interested in this one, but if you do, it's partially because of something called the spotlight effect. You might think that 50% of people notice what you're doing, but the truth is closer to 20%. Or less. So ever feel like people are watching you like every second and it gives you anxiety? Well, that feeling has a different name because anxiety is usually wrong. Psychologists call it the spotlight effect, and it means that your brain acts like a spotlight is glued to you. You assume people notice every flaw and they judge it, and your brain starts making predictions and stressing out over what it is that you're doing and what they might be thinking. But the truth is, most people barely notice because they're busy thinking about themselves. So one student walked into class, this was a study that he references, wearing this huge, goofy Barry Manilow t-shirt, and he guessed that at least half the room saw the shirt on him. I mean, it's pretty silly, but it turns out only 1 in 5 did. And the ones who did notice moved on fast. They didn't even sit there judging him very long in their own heads. In other experiments, kids with muddy faces, messy hair, and stained shirts still overestimated how many people saw it and judged them. So even extremely obvious stuff gets way less attention than it feels like it does from the people around you. That's why social anxiety can steal hours over things that never happen. So next time it hits, you can try one simple shift. Put your attention outwards, give the person in front of you your full focus, and you can remember that they themselves are under their own spotlight effect also, so they're probably not thinking that much about you. And then you can ask yourself, what would you do today if you stopped assuming you were the main event? All right, time you've been waiting for. It's finally time to talk about mushrooms. Joseph Julian wrote this. The boundary is thinner than you think. What DMT reveals when the mind's filters go quiet. All right, so what if DMT isn't your brain glitching out, but your brain unmuting something? So the usual story says that psychedelics just cause hallucinations, noisy neurons, but this piece says that that's wildly insufficient because DMT experiences don't feel random, they feel rule-bound. So it talks about something called mere mind theory that treats consciousness as a layered, recursive, and compressed version of the world around us. In plain terms, it means recursion means patterns inside of patterns inside of patterns, and that's what the brain is sort of getting stuck on, like these fractals. Whereas our normal awareness is a narrow band built for survival, language, and not for stepping into traffic. So the brain runs a filter to be normal. Here it's tied to the default mode network, basically the mind's narrator dampening the field. When DMT shuts down, the constraints lift. So in this model, DMT is more of a gate, meaning that it widens the recursive depth that our brain can go through. More cognition happens per moment. That's why 5 minutes can feel like a century, I guess, when you're on DMT. I haven't done it myself, but with symmetries and motifs repeating like a grammar. And the entities that people talk about seeing all the time, well, that kind of makes sense if they're framed as emergent agents, fragments of agency that stabilize when the observer boundary softens. So the idea is that ordinary consciousness is a carefully maintained tunnel, and DMT briefly turns on the lights outside of that tunnel. It takes off the filter of reality. And to go along with that, there was a study that just came out. It was led by Alex Kwan and collaborators that provides the first precise map of how psilocybin alters brain circuitry. So it's looking at the synaptic level, and it uses a genetically engineered rabies virus as a one-step neural tracer. So the researchers were able to track which neurons rewired after psilocybin exposure in mice. Pretty wild stuff. It revealed that not just some change occurs, but exactly where that change is occurring. And the core findings are that psilocybin caused an organized network-specific rewiring, not just like randomness everywhere. So there could be some truth to that filter theory. or hypothesis, I should say, sensory and perception related circuits such as visual, somatic sensory, motor, and spatial memory pathways were strengthened. Somatosensory? Let me just see what that means. Well, that's like touch, pressure, texture, and vibration. Got it. But it is interesting because the study marks a turning point by showing consciousness-related change at cellular resolution. It reframes psilocybin as a tool that opens up a temporary window where brain structure follows attention. And the research reveals both the extraordinary healing potential and serious ethical responsibility of changing and rewiring somebody's brain, or some rat's brain, leaving future outcomes dependent on how this knowledge is applied rather than on the science itself. Now apply your thumb or index finger to the hype button, and I'll see you guys in the next video.